The discovery, the lunar surface stretched endlessly in every direction. A dead sea of gray dust and silence. Commander Tejo adjusted his helmet visor and stared at the scanner mounted to his wrist. The readout flickered, numbers climbing far beyond what should have been possible. He tapped the device twice, then looked up at the rest of his team. Dawn was already kneeling by the excavation site, her gloved hands brushing away layers of regolith with mechanical precision. Saujin stood beside her, holding the ground-penetrating radar unit like it had personally offended him. Joe hovered near the rover, double-checking the relay connection back to base. Honig was the only one who seemed calm, arms crossed, staring at the pit they had dug as if waiting for it to explain itself. Still getting the same readings, Tejo said. Pure metal. No oxidation, no decay. And it's not supposed to be here. Nothing's supposed to be here, Honig replied. That's why we came. Tejo ignored the sarcasm. Honig was right, technically. This was meant to be a routine geological survey, the kind of mission that generated data for researchers back on Earth and little else. Boring work, safe work. Until 3 hours ago when Sujin's radar had caught something that didn't belong. Dawn stood up, dust falling from her knees in slow motion. It's not a meteorite. The structure is too regular, geometric, and it's massive. The scan suggests it goes down at least 200 meters. Sujin's voice crackled over the comm. If this is some kind of buried habitat, why didn't the orbital surveys catch it? Because it's old, Tejo said quietly. Older than any of us can measure. The crew fell silent. On Earth, speculation like that would have been dismissed immediately. But here, standing on a world that had been geologically dead for billions of years, the impossible didn't feel quite so distant. Tejo made the decision quickly. We dig, carefully, and we document everything. It took 6 hours to reach the surface of the object. The excavation was slow, deliberate, each shovelful of lunar soil catalogued and scanned. When the first panel was finally exposed, the crew froze. The material was unlike anything in the mission database. It was smooth, almost glassy, but when Dawn tapped it with a tool, it rang like metal. The surface didn't reflect light the way normal materials did. Instead, it seemed to absorb it, then release it a fraction of a second later, creating a faint afterglow that lingered in the vacuum. Joe ran a spectrometer over the panel. The device whirred, then beeped in confusion. I'm getting no match. Not steel, not titanium, not any alloy we've cataloged. The molecular structure doesn't even make sense. It's like the atoms are organized wrong. Organized wrong? Sujin repeated. Yeah, like they're ignoring the periodic table. Honig crouched down and placed a hand on the surface. It's warm. That got everyone's attention. Tejo checked his own scanner. Honig was right. The panel was radiating heat, faint but measurable. On a moon with no atmosphere and no internal activity, that was impossible. Something's still active, Tejo said. After all this time, whatever this is, it's still powered. Dawn's voice was steady, but Tejo could hear the excitement beneath it. We need to find an entrance. They spread out, mapping the exposed section of the structure. It took another hour before Sujin called out. Here, I think this is it. The crew gathered around him. He was standing before a seam in the metal, barely visible unless you knew where to look. It formed a perfect rectangle 2 meters high and 1 meter wide. There was no handle, no keypad, no mechanism of any kind. Just the seam. Tejo reached out and pressed his hand against it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without sound or motion, the panel simply ceased to exist. 1 second it was there, solid and real. The next it was gone, leaving only an open doorway into darkness. The crew stared. Did anyone else see that? Joe whispered. Yeah, Honig said. I really wish I hadn't. Tejo stepped forward, shining his helmet light into the opening. The beam cut through the darkness and revealed a corridor. The walls were the same impossible material, smooth and faintly glowing. The passage stretched forward in a straight line, then curved gently out of sight. We're going in, Tejo said. No one argued. The interior of the structure defied every expectation. The corridor was wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, and the floor was perfectly level. There were no seams, no joints, no sign that the structure had been assembled. It looked as though it had been grown, or carved from a single piece of material that spanned the entire length of the vessel. Because that's what it was, Tejo realized. A vessel, not a habitat, not a station. A ship. The walls emitted a soft, steady light that had no obvious source. It wasn't bright, but it was enough to see by, and it didn't cast shadows the way normal light should. Joe waved his hand in front of his helmet lamp, watching his shadow bend in ways that made no geometric sense. "This place is wrong," he muttered. "Wrong how?" Don asked. "Wrong in every way that matters." They walked deeper. The corridor branched once, then twice. Each branch looked identical, and there were no markings, no signs, no indication of where any path led. Teo marked their route with chemical tracers, small glowing dots that would help them navigate back. After 10 minutes of walking, they entered a larger chamber. It was circular, perhaps 30 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling that stretched high above them. The walls were covered in patterns, lines, curves, spirals that shifted and changed as they watched. Not like a hologram, like the walls themselves were alive. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on the pedestal something waited. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a weapon. It was something else entirely. A shape that hurt to look at. An object that seemed to occupy more space than it physically could. Tejo felt his eyes water as he tried to focus on it. "What is that?" Sujin breathed. "I don't know," Tejo said, "but I think it wants us to find out." The awakening Dawn approached the pedestal first. She moved slowly, her boots making no sound on the strange floor. The object at the center of the room seemed to hum, though there was no air to carry sound. It was a vibration, something felt rather than heard, a resonance that passed through the bones and into the mind. Tejo watched her closely, one hand resting on the emergency beacon at his belt. If something went wrong, he wanted to be ready. But as Dawn drew closer, nothing attacked. Nothing moved. The object simply waited. "It's responding," Dawn said. Her voice was calm, but Tejo could hear the tension beneath it. "The patterns on the walls, they're changing in sync with my movements. Like it's tracking me." "Back away," Tejo ordered. Dawn didn't move. "No, I think it's safe. I think it's curious." Hunnick stepped forward. "Curious? It's a machine. Machines don't get curious. This one does." Dawn reached out, her gloved hand hovering inches from the object. The patterns on the walls pulsed faster, brighter. The hum grew louder, deeper, until it felt like the entire chamber was vibrating. Then Dawn touched it. The world shifted. Tejo's vision blurred. For a moment he wasn't standing in the chamber anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere vast and dark and impossibly cold. He saw stars, billions of them stretching across a sky that had no horizon. He saw shapes moving between them, structures so large they bent space itself. Then he was back. The chamber was the same. Dawn was still standing by the pedestal, her hand pressed against the object. But something had changed. The walls were no longer shifting randomly. The patterns had stabilized, forming symbols that almost looked like language. Dawn pulled her hand away and stumbled backward. Sujin caught her before she fell. "What did you see?" Tejo demanded. "Everything," Dawn whispered. "I saw everything." The symbols on the walls began to glow. One by one, they detached from the surface and floated into the air, drifting like embers from a fire. Tejo reached out to touch one, and the moment his glove made contact, knowledge flooded his mind. He saw blueprints, schematics, designs for machines that operated on principles he didn't understand. He saw formulas, equations that described forces beyond gravity and electromagnetism. He saw maps of space, charting routes between stars that were so distant their light hadn't reached Earth yet, and he understood none of it. But somehow he knew it was real. The symbol faded and Tejo blinked, his mind reeling. Around him, the rest of the crew was experiencing the same thing. Joe stared at a floating glyph, his mouth open in silent shock. Hunnick reached for another symbol, then pulled back as if burned. "It's a library," Dawn said. She was still leaning against Sujin, but her eyes were clear now. "This whole ship, it's a repository of knowledge. Left here for someone to find." "By who?" Sujin asked. "I don't know, but they wanted us to learn." Tejo forced himself to focus. "We need to document this. Every symbol, every image. If this is what I think it is, this could change everything." Hunnick shook his head. "Or it could kill us. We don't know what this technology is capable of. We don't know if it's safe." "Nothing about this is safe," Tejo replied. "But we came here to explore. And that's what we're going to do." They spent hours in the chamber recording everything they could. The symbols continued to appear, each one carrying fragments of information that defied comprehension. Some showed star systems, others depicted biological forms, alien creatures with geometries that didn't match anything in Earth's evolutionary history. Still others displayed what looked like historical records, scenes of cities and wars and migrations across impossible distances. But the most unsettling symbols were the ones that showed Earth. Ju was the first to notice. He called the others over and pointed to a glyph floating near the ceiling. It showed a blue planet with familiar continents, oceans that matched Earth's geography perfectly. But the land masses were wrong. The ice caps were larger. The deserts were smaller. "This is Earth," Ju said, "but not our Earth. This is what it looked like millions of years ago." Dawn studied the image. They were here. Whoever built this ship, they visited Earth before humans even existed. The implications settled over the crew like a weight. This wasn't just a discovery. It was proof. Proof that humanity wasn't alone. Proof that other civilizations had existed long before Homo sapiens ever walked upright. Proof that the universe was far older, far stranger, and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Tejo felt the enormity of it pressing down on him. "We need to go deeper. If this is just the first chamber, there's more. There has to be." "Deeper?" Hunnick echoed. "You saw what happened when Dawn touched that thing. You want to risk that again?" "Yes," Tejo said simply. "Because if we don't, someone else will. And I'd rather it be us." They left the chamber and continued down the corridor. The ship seemed to respond to their presence now, lighting their path with the same soft glow. Doors opened without being touched. Walls shifted to reveal new passages. It was as if the ship itself was guiding them, leading them towards something. After an hour of walking, they reached another chamber. This one was different, smaller, more intimate. The walls were covered in what looked like windows, though they didn't show the outside. Instead, they displayed scenes, memories perhaps, or recordings. Each window showed a different moment in time. One showed a city made of crystal, towers stretching toward a red sky. Another showed a fleet of ships, sleek and silent, moving through the void. A third showed a single figure standing on a barren world, staring up at a dying star. Tejo approached one of the windows and saw himself. Or rather, he saw a version of himself, older, scarred, standing in a place he didn't recognize. The figure turned and looked directly at him, and for a moment Tejo felt as though he was staring into his own future. Then the image faded. "This ship isn't just a library," Dawn said quietly. "It's a test. It's showing us what we could become, or what we should fear," Hunnick added. Tejo didn't respond. He was staring at the center of the chamber where another pedestal stood. And on this pedestal something waited, something that looked almost human. The truth, the figure on the pedestal didn't move. It stood perfectly still, arms at its sides, eyes closed. It looked human, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. But there were differences. The proportions were wrong. The fingers were too long. The skin had a faint metallic sheen like polished bronze. Tejo stepped closer. The figure's chest wasn't rising and falling. It wasn't breathing. It wasn't alive. But it wasn't a statue either. It was something in between. A construct, perhaps, or a recording given physical form. Dawn reached out and touched the figure's hand. The moment her fingers made contact, the figure's eyes opened. They were black, not dark brown or shadowed, but black, voids that seemed to swallow light. The figure turned its head slowly, looking at each member of the crew in turn. When its gaze fell on Tejo, he felt something shift inside his mind. Words appeared. Not spoken, not heard, just present. "You have come far." Tejo's mouth went dry. "What are you?" "I am a guide. A fragment of those who built this vessel. I exist to test, to teach, and to remember." "Test us?" Sujin asked. "For what?" "To see if you are ready." The chamber shifted. The walls dissolved, replaced by open space. Stars surrounded them on all sides, vast and infinite. The crew stood on nothing, floating in a void that had no up or down, no beginning or end. Hunnick swore loudly. Joe grabbed onto Dawn's arm. Tejo forced himself to stay calm, even as his mind screamed that this was impossible. "Your species has reached the threshold," the figure continued. "You have left your world. You have begun to explore. But exploration alone is not enough. You must understand. You must adapt. You must survive what comes next. What comes next?" Tejo demanded. The stars shifted. A new image appeared, Earth hanging in the void, peaceful and blue. Then the image changed. The planet's surface erupted in fire. Continents cracked. Oceans boiled. And above it all, something massive descended from the sky. A shape so enormous it blotted out the sun. There are forces in this universe that do not tolerate stagnation, civilizations that consume, entities that erase. You have been noticed. And you are not ready. Don's voice was shaking. Why are you showing us this? 'Cause you must be ready. Because your species has one advantage that others did not. What advantage? The figure turned to face her fully. You adapt. You change. You survive what should kill you. That is humanity's strength. That is why you were chosen. The vision faded. The chamber returned, solid and real once more. The figure stepped down from the pedestal, moving with a grace that didn't match its rigid appearance. This ship was left here as a gift and a warning. Inside you will find knowledge, technology, tools that will prepare you for what lies beyond. But knowledge alone will not save you. You must learn to wield it. You must become more than you are. Tejo's mind was racing. How long do we have? Centuries, perhaps less. The forces that threaten you move slowly, but they move inevitably. By the time they arrive, you must be ready to stand against them, or you will fall as countless others have. The crew spent the next hours exploring the ship. The figure, whatever it was, guided them through chambers filled with devices that defied understanding. Machines that manipulated gravity, engines that folded space, weapons that operated on principles physics couldn't yet explain. Don stood before a console that displayed star charts stretching across the galaxy. If we take this knowledge back to Earth, we change everything, Tejo finished. Energy, travel, medicine, war, everything. Hanek looked uneasy. And if we're not ready for it? If we use it wrong? Then we lose, Sujin said quietly. But if we don't take it, we lose anyway. Tejo made the decision. We take everything. We document it all, and when we get back, we make sure the right people see it. The scientists, the engineers, the leaders who understand what's at stake. Ju looked doubtful. And if they don't listen? Then we make them listen. When they finally left the ship, the lunar surface felt almost normal by comparison. The dig site was still there, untouched, exactly as they'd left it. But the crew had changed. They moved differently now, spoke differently, thought differently. As the rover carried them back to the landing site, Tejo looked back at the excavation. The entrance to the ship was still visible, a dark rectangle in the gray dust. He wondered how long it would stay hidden, how long before others came looking. What do we tell them? Dawn asked. She was sitting beside him, staring at the horizon. The truth, Tejo said, that we found something, that we're not alone, and that we have work to do. Back on Earth, the mission report caused chaos. Governments convened emergency sessions. Scientists demanded access. The media exploded with speculation. But through it all, one thing became clear. Humanity had been given a gift. A chance. A warning. The ship remained on the moon, buried beneath the surface, waiting. Its secrets were no longer hidden. Its purpose was understood. And across the planet, engineers and researchers began the slow, painstaking work of translating alien knowledge into human capability. It would take decades, maybe centuries, but humanity had time. Not much, but enough. And for the first time in history, they knew what they were preparing for. Commander Tejo stood in a lab on Earth, staring at a holographic display of the alien ship. Around him, scientists argued over equations and blueprints. Outside, the world continued to spin, unaware of the storm that was coming. But Tejo knew. He had seen the vision. He had touched the knowledge, and he understood, with absolute certainty, that humanity's greatest test was still ahead. But for the first time, they had a chance to pass it. And that, he thought, was all anyone could ask for.